Hey, thanks for checking out The Solid Verbal. Now would be a great time to subscribe to the channel for college football content all off season long.
Welcome back to The Solid Verbal. Boys and girls, my name, Ty Hildenbrand, that guy over there, Dan Rubenstein. This is part of our National Signing Day of our recruiting roundup of sorts. On the last episode we talked about 5 teams. We got 5 more coming your way today. As I said on the last episode, Big Ten and Big Ten adjacent heavy, as we've got Notre Dame, we've got Penn State, we've got Michigan, we've got Ohio State, and we've got incoming Big Ten member USC. Sir, how are you today in good old Chicago?
Still good, still warm. Back's a little bit sore, Ty, from carrying this show, but I'm very excited to talk Big Ten adjacent teams. You know it.
Well, we're going to trade places on this episode. On the last one, you did carry that episode. You did a good job of it. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Today, though, I've got Notre Dame. Today, I've got Ohio State. Today, I've got Penn State. You've got USC. And, of course, your Michigan Wolverines.
Yeah. You want to start Notre Dame?
I do want to start with Notre Dame.
Okay.
What we're trying to do here, just to recap, is go through each of these programs and talk through where the recruiting emphasis was, which players made sense, which guys we could see stepping in and making an instant impact. Are you more excited by Notre Dame's current class, or would you be more excited by what could have been for Notre Dame in this year's class? Well, I think a little bit of both, right? Like the Keon Keeley thing hurts.
Dante Moore seemed like he was headed to Notre Dame for a spell there. Peyton Bowen committed forever. Yeah,
there were a couple names that felt like they slipped away. The Keon Keeley one to me really sticks in my craw because I was really excited about that. I don't blame the kid for going to Alabama, but that one to me is the one that stung the most. But I thought, all things considered, given Notre Dame's work in the portal, they were able to cobble something together that is actually quite exciting. If only because of Sam Hartman. Sam Hartman coming in, I think, gives them an added pop. I know you're high on Caleb Smith from Virginia Tech as well. But those two names, there are others, but those two names in particular in the portal, I think are very exciting. You add those to the other guys that they brought in as part of this class, and I still feel pretty good about it. It's a top 10 class, give or take. It's top 10 class. They did good work. I think they emphasized some key areas where they know they need help, and it didn't feel to me at all like recruiting dropped off, which is always what you watch for. Whenever you got a new coach, is recruiting taking a big step back? Is there a drastic change in focus that is going to make things feel like they're coming off the swivel a little bit? We didn't see any of that here.
Right.
So I feel confident about where Notre Dame is at. It could have been better, but it obviously could have been a lot worse.
What are the odds we finish the Notre Dame 2023 season? God, I'm such a hater. I apologize. I'm even catching myself doing it. Like, man, I can already visualize, well, it's a disappointing Fiesta Bowl for Sam Hartman, right? Can't you see that, like, a good season? Like, ooh, man, Ohio State just had their way with Notre Dame in the Fiesta.
I mean, Sam Hartman had a game where he had like 4 interceptions on consecutive drives.
Yeah.
Or
very difficult to do.
Some crazy stat like that, 5 interceptions in a game.
Right.
So he is for sure no stranger to losing a game for his team. He also was in a situation, I think, where he was trying to do a lot of it. He was trying to do most of the work, and he will have more of a support system around him. Now, I will get to that in a second because that is my biggest question, not just about Notre Dame in 23, but about this class and who from among a certain position group can step up. But I believe with the line in front of him, a veteran line, with the running back stable behind him, he will have enough support that he will not have to play hero ball. And so there's definitely a chance Notre Dame could be in that game, and it's a disappointing Fiesta Bowl and all that. Can't rule that out. But I think Sam Hartman, the reason I'm so excited about Sam Hartman is because he's in a much more advantageous situation.
Probably.
Not just because of the offense and the line in front of him, but also because of the defense.
Yeah.
The defense will not put him in a situation where he's got to go out there and score 50 points a game.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. Who are the children, Ty? Who are the children who can come in this year and reinforce, replace, add to the Notre Dame project?
Jaden Greathouse.
Okay.
Jaden Greathouse is a receiver from Texas. He's not the biggest guy. He's like 6'1.5", but he's like 220.
Okay.
210, 220. He's a physical receiver. The comp to him is David Bell. You remember David Bell?
Of course. Yeah, Purdue.
So can do a little bit of everything, right? He can run. He can get open deep if he has to. He can be that red zone presence if he has to. He can get some of those tough catches to move the chains if he has to. Notre Dame didn't really have that guy. That guy was Michael Mayer this season. So Notre Dame obviously has a need at receiver. It should be no great secret that there was some degree of emphasis there at receiver. There was also some emphasis on both lines, on the defensive backfield as well for Marcus Freeman. In many respects, he kind of kept that train rolling. It's not unlike what Brian Kelly did. It's not unlike what a lot of the teams did that we talked about in the last episode. You focus on the lines. Try to add a couple playmakers. You try to make sure you've got air cover, right? That seems to be a tried and true formula. Notre Dame, as you mentioned, did not have as good of a class as it appeared when they were number one overall way back when, a year ago, but still 24 stars in this class. They finish at 10 or 11, again, give or take a couple spots. Pretty much set at quarterback with Sam Hartman, pretty much set at running back, pretty much set along the offensive line, but definitely room for improvement out wide. And that is where somebody needs to step up. So maybe it's Jaden Greathouse from Texas. Again, I like him a lot. I think he's a guy who has all the necessary skills to step in and make an impact, especially now that you've got a quarterback like Sam Hartman. He's a playmaking wideout. There are other guys that they just couldn't get involved as part of the receiving core this past season, I think because they were limited at quarterback, but it's probably unfair to throw this all on Drew Pine. Somebody's going to need to step up. So if you're an incoming receiver like Greathouse, like some of the other guys that, I probably won't have time to mention here, that there is an opportunity for you. Some other names that are of interest to me, Christian Gray at cornerback is a 4-star. Notre Dame isn't particularly deep back there, and I could see him having a role to play.
Okay.
I'm also interested in Brennan Vernon up front, the big defensive lineman, somebody who can perhaps give them a little bit of a pass rush. Notre Dame has been pretty good at churning out good defensive line talent over the last 5 years or so. They've been good at developing guys who can rush. And so I could see Brennan Vernon, big kid, stepping in and having a real impact there along the line. I'm pretty pleased with this class. It feels like it's fairly well-rounded. It feels like it addresses the necessary spots where they need to get better. The portal move to get Hartman was obviously the most notable, but again, we're not talking about Georgia. We're not talking about Ohio State. We're not talking about Alabama. We're talking about Notre Dame. And if you're a freshman as part of this Notre Dame incoming class, I don't care what position you're at, there is an opportunity to contribute in a meaningful way.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Notre Dame this year, especially, I mean, you would know better than I about the roster and the strengths and weaknesses. If receiver is a place where you can come in and contribute, it's not the worst year to be a freshman, even though the schedule seems to be kind of backloaded. And there are a number of teams that will feature NFL talent on defense, and it's going to be a step up, obviously. But it's NC State, Clemson, Pitt.
Yeah.
USC has some top level talent in the back end of that defense, even though they're starting over in some ways. I know Duke took a step forward on defense. I don't know who I'm missing in terms of more scary defenses on Notre Dame's 2023 schedule. I'm sure I'm missing some. Oh, Ohio State. How about that?
Ohio State, yeah.
Ohio State at home. So the first few weeks aren't terrible, but yeah, at NC State and Ohio State in September, they're going to be tests. And I wonder about the confidence that Tommy Rees with a new quarterback is going to have in featuring young receivers against, couple of those schools. So yeah, it'll be fascinating to watch. If they're good enough to play, they're going to either shine right away or kind of disappear right away.
Look, the math is very, very simple for Notre Dame from this past season.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of Michael Mayer, nobody really got a whole lot of work.
Yeah.
At receiver. Lorenzo Styles was the next highest in terms of targets. He only got 49 targets.
Yeah.
That's not a lot. Braden Lenzy, gone. Jane Thomas, big number 83, as we refer to him here lovingly on the show. He got some time as well. But beyond that, it was like, Deion Colsey got 9 catches. It's a lot of guys. Tobias Merriweather, who I would love to see more of. One catch for 41 yards this past season. So whoever it is, whether it's somebody on the roster, whether it's somebody transferring in, whether it's somebody coming in as part of the freshman class, it's kind of a blank slate. There. And if you've got talent, if you can show out, there's going to be a spot for you. You're going to be able to get some snaps.
So what you're saying is at some point in some sort of coach's offensive meeting room, the phrase, might as well, will be uttered. Okay.
Yeah.
Why not?
Why not? This should be an offense that has a lot to offer that receiver core, if only because of Hartman and because the line is so good and because there's a complementary ground game. They spent, I've talked about this a little bit, I think off air with friends of mine who are Notre Dame fans. And, of course, it's a very skeptical viewpoint, but you could probably make the case that Notre Dame didn't think they were going to go anywhere when they had to start Drew Pine. And so they just solely focused on developing their offensive line and figuring out the rushing attack. Just get that in a good place because they know they've got a lot coming back for 23. I know that's not what they did, but in a sense, they kind of did figure it out by the end of the season, and they were really good as a ground team. Going into 23 now with that kind of feather in their cap, better quarterback, some receivers at least to pick from. Hopefully that makes the whole thing more well-rounded.
Yep. By the way, also just quickly in terms of the ACC-ish, which Notre Dame, I believe at this moment still is ACC-ish. Florida State, small class because they've been more aggressive in the portal, but they bring in a top, I think, 4 or 5 receiver in Hakeem Williams, big body for Jordan Travis, potentially to work into that rotation. The headline of Miami's class is, Brandon talked about this before, those 2 big offensive tackles. Offensive line still very much an issue for Miami. The name I'd look out for, just because of Will Mallory making his way to the NFL, is Riley Williams from IMG. Yeah. I think he's from the West Coast, but transferred out to play in Florida. So there seems to be opportunity. I think was it Colby Young, who seems to be the receiver of the future, but Riley Williams could be a name to get into the mix for Miami. Clemson with a good class, but otherwise the ACC kind of as expected. Right? The ACC as expected, a couple new coaches, or at least one new coach. Louisville, North Carolina, not, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, you might have the rankings in front of you, not necessarily trending in the right direction on the recruiting trail after really popping the past couple years.
Yeah, 4th in the ACC.
4th in the ACC, finishing what looks to be outside of the top 25. Smaller class at just 20 kids, but
27.
Yeah, not really a threat for that blue chip ratio.
No. Why don't we stick with Ohio State since we called them out as part of Notre Dame's 2023 campaign. Ohio State's in an interesting spot. Ohio State is going to be replacing C.J. Stroud. He's obviously very good. He's going to be a top 10 pick easily. And they are rebuilding a good chunk of their offensive line. So as part of this class, they signed 3 interior linemen. I don't necessarily think any of those guys are going to be the ones that strap them on and go out there and start playing with the ones. But I think if you're Ohio State at this point, you've got enough depth. It just might take a little bit to figure out who those guys are up front, picking from guys who do have a little bit more experience. But clearly a little bit of a focus trying to get some interior lineman depth coming into the 23 campaign. In terms of where there is potential, though, for somebody from this class to step up immediately and make an impact, I think it's on defense.
Okay.
The name that stands out to me is Jermaine Matthews. He's the number 2 prospect out of the state of Ohio, number 13 corner. Corner is an area for Ohio State where they don't have a whole lot of depth, or probably have more depth than most teams, but could use more if they really want to stay on that top echelon. So Jermaine Matthews, I could see him stepping up in a very meaningful way, very early on, contending for a 3rd or 4th cornerback spot. I think they're feeling like going into the season they've got enough numbers to account for 1, 2, and 3 out wide. But that 4th corner spot, if you're looking at somebody who could be a quick riser, I think Matthews is a name that obviously makes the most sense. In terms of the class, this was 5th overall. So not as high as Ohio State's been in the past, but still very, very solid. It's tough to split hairs and look at this thing and feel too scorned about what the Buckeyes did. It was a very well-rounded class. They seemingly address most of the field with this class, but definitely a focus at cornerback, also a focus at receiver. Brought in a number of guys that I don't think necessarily are going to have a spot this season because they are crazy deep at wide receiver. Right. I feel like we say that every season, but Emeka Egbuka, we've got Julian Fleming as a 3 this season.
Yep.
Marvin Harrison
back. Yeah.
Cade Stover back at tight end. Marvin Harrison Jr. might be the best of the bunch. He's back as well. So they're very, very solid out wide. Presumably it's Kyle McCord as the new quarterback throwing to them. But very good in the backfield as well. Trey Henderson,
back.
Trey Henderson's back. Mayan Williams is back. Like there's a lot to like about this offense, though it will take some time for that line to sort of organize itself and obviously for the new quarterback to settle into rhythm. But if you're looking for a guy to step up to maybe make his presence felt early, I think it's Jermaine Matthews. I think he's really, really solid at corner.
So an interesting time for Ohio State recruiting, which remains excellent, but you'd see a lot of when Ohio State would start stacking the blue chip receiver commitments, you'd see a lot of Ohio State fans, great, who's playing linebacker? Great, where are the corners? Great, where are the linebackers? Like there is that concern on defense that if there was a place that Ohio State is not up to par, when Ohio State fans measure themselves, and the Ohio State coaches measure themselves against Georgia, against Alabama, against whoever, against Michigan, obviously, that those teams are out-recruiting Ohio State on defense. Yeah. And Ohio State has done very, very well along the lines, but in that back 7, back 8 is where Ohio State isn't necessarily aligning themselves roster-wise with the schools they measure themselves against. And you're right about receiver. They keep stacking those guys. Quarterback is interesting. They came in late and picked off Lincoln Keenholz, however you pronounce it, from South Dakota, I believe.
Pierre, South Dakota, Dan.
Pierre, South Dakota. He was committed to Washington forever. They get a decommitment. I don't guess they didn't get it, but they received a polite decommitment from Dylan Raiola, the number 1 overall player in the 2024 class. Quinn Ewers obviously transfers away, and so Ohio State was one of those programs stacking blue chip quarterbacks, and suddenly there are open questions about what the future, at least. I think Kyle McCord is well thought of for right now, but what does the future look like at quarterback for Ohio State? So that'll be fascinating to watch, and not unlike a number of these programs, right? Notre Dame doesn't have a clear guy on the roster right now for the future. Sam Hartman's it this year, and then they have a freshman next year. Michigan, we're going to talk about, I think it's a Jack Tuttle or walk-on situation at number 2, and they don't. I don't believe they have a commitment for 2024 at the moment. Also, sort of push their chips in for Dante Moore. So it's fascinating to watch these guys try to align rosters around a guy and nobody behind him, or being extremely hopeful for next year, or that a safety plan works out. And Ohio State is in that conversation right now.
And that's a transfer portal thing, right? It's
totally.
A transfer portal thing, especially at a big place where you go to Ohio State, you go to Michigan, you go to Notre Dame, you're playing quarterback. If they're willing to give you a scholarship, you feel like you're good enough to play anywhere.
Yeah.
And now in the era of the transfer portal, you can go anywhere.
Yep. It should mention Devin Brown is on the Ohio State roster as well.
Devin Brown's on the Ohio State roster.
Yeah.
Who they feel good about as well. But like, it's an interesting thing, I think, to chart moving forward. What may be a lack of quarterback depth in some of these programs.
Right. We saw it behind Trevor Lawrence for a spell. Yeah. We saw it. It didn't actually come to bite them, but we saw it a little bit with Bryce Young this year.
We saw it this year with Notre Dame.
We saw it this year with Notre Dame for sure. And so the ability to move around, because probably whoever loses the Kyle McCord, Devin Brown sweepstakes this spring, that might be that second movement of the portal season. So all fascinating to watch moving forward.
Let's go to Ohio State's rival, Michigan, Dan.
Yeah.
Your adopted team. You love the Michigan Wolverines.
Yeah, that's me. I enjoy Michigan. People who listen to the show think I don't enjoy Michigan, which is a very strange, balancing act, but okay.
Got a big recommitment for the 3rd time from Jim Harbaugh.
Yes.
Since one of our last recordings, there was, again, more smoke about the NFL and the Denver Broncos and an in-person meeting. Perhaps that would be a thing, and the Broncos went in the direction of Sean Payton. So Jim Harbaugh, barring any kind of late-breaking development, seemingly will be back for the 23 season
Maybe Jim Harbaugh's just lonely. Maybe he just loves hanging out. And anytime there's a job opening, and Jim Harbaugh's a very good coach, they're like, "What would you be interested, Jim?" And be like, "Can we go to a diner? Can we hang out?"
That's the precise reason why you and I do a podcast, just to have somebody to talk to. But
just to have, maybe Jim Harbaugh, he's not going to take the Saskatchewan Roughriders job per se, but he'll have Coco, right? He's always down.
Jim Harbaugh as the host of a true crime podcast seems like it would fit.
Sure. He's always down. Okay. Michigan's class is fascinating. It's not top 10, even though they are at the moment a top 4 program after making the playoff the last couple of years and winning the Big Ten impressively so, I should add. Michigan, another one of those programs, they do not have a blue chip quarterback in this year's class. J.J. McCarthy is the guy. No. Defensively, they lose a number of key pieces up and down this defense, but still return a ton of key pieces. I think the big thing is what they return on offense, which includes Roman Wilson and Cornelius Johnson. They've got a bunch of old receivers, which means their priority this year was receiver. I don't think a number of these guys are going to see the field. I think it's just going to be a lot of, Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum in the backfield, and Colston Loveland he emerged last year at tight end, even with Eric All and Luke Schoonmaker moving on. Offensive line is in a good place, even though they bring in promising offensive linemen in this year's class. I think it's going to come down to probably a little bit, maybe some rotation guys. It's I looked this up and now it's Etta Eno, the edge rusher. I know it's Etta. I'll get the exact pronunciation here in a second.
Don't ask me for pronunciations. That's not my thing.
I'm not going to ask you. But they're in a good place. There's a reason why a lot of these guys are not going to see the field, and it's an extremely good one. It's that they've built up depth these past couple of years. Eno Etta is from Texas, edge guy, good size, good burst. I don't even know how much he's going to see the field just because they've developed guys so well up front, and they return a bunch of experience up front, Mason Graham, Chris Jenkins, guys like that. And so maybe it's at corner because they're not afraid. Jesse Minter did a great job playing younger guys last year, highlighted by Will Johnson, but they return so much in the defensive backfield as well that I really don't see a ton of early impact dudes. Sometimes you like to point to running back because it's one of the easier positions to get used to as a college freshman, but there's depth there, right? There's Blake Corum, who should be healthy, and Donovan Edwards. Cole Cabana, by the way, is the name of the incoming running back of choice. Great name. Almost like if there were an expanded universe of like a Super Nintendo fighting game, let's meet the new characters, right? Oh, Cole Cabana is a wise-cracking kid from the streets of the Bahamas. Yeah. I think he's just from Detroit. Cole Cabana coming in, so maybe he's a running back of the future. But they're in a really good place. They hit the portal for offensive line, so I don't think there's going to be a lot of early impact there, even though they're down a couple key guys. Maybe at corner, maybe rotationally, but no. I don't see a ton of obvious early impact guys for Michigan. Again, just because the roster's in a great spot.
Do I have license to call him Cola?
Cola Cabana?
Yeah.
For just what reason?
Well, I mean, I have this sort of reputation at this point, dating back to Duke of Hazzard, Alan Lazard, changing a name a little bit in order to, spark a nickname. So
Cole Cabana,
if we can start, if we can do some sort of Barry Manilow Cola Cabana spin
in the cola. Yeah. Well, it's Copa.
I understand the song.
The song, okay.
I'm just saying we can change things a little bit, maybe keep the beat.
They're in a good place. I noticed, I think it was the early signing period where Jim Harbaugh pointed out that he was especially fond of a recruit when he found out that the recruit's grandmother, somebody in the extended family of the recruit, was a train conductor.
Of course.
And Jim Harbaugh pointed out, he was like, oh man, Bill Harbaugh. I think it was Bill Harbaugh, like great uncle of Jim Harbaugh. He was like, it's in my blood too. Immediately responded to the kid. I'm like, all right, choo choo. Great.
All right. Let's talk about one more team here in the Big Ten.
Okay.
Let's round out the Big Ten East, and then we can go out west. In the new Big Ten West, I guess, with USC. Let's talk about Penn State.
Okay.
Penn State to me is fascinating this year. There is a lot of steam on Penn State going into 23, not just because of quarterback, not just because of the running back duo, but because Penn State, for all intents and purposes, is in a really good spot this coming season.
Yeah.
Obviously, got to get over that hump. Got to knock off both Ohio State and Michigan if you truly want to announce that you've arrived, which is sort of what we're waiting for with James Franklin. But they're in a really good spot. This recruiting class, 15th nationally, second in the Big Ten, if only because Michigan had, as you mentioned, a class for other reasons that wasn't as high as it normally is. But a particular focus this year for Penn State on defensive line and defensive back. Not as many losses along that defensive line as I think might jump out to you, or as you might think in looking at this class, but certainly an area where they're trying to build depth. They're always deep up front. That's kind of their calling card. Secondary, they obviously have some losses there as well that they need to address. I think they're trying to address that as best they can here through the recruiting game. They definitely need some help, though, out wide with wide receivers leaving. A big get was Dante Cephas, the transfer from Kent State. He's going to help plug that gap. They've got a lot of second-year guys that I think are going to step up and eventually fill out that receiver room, but that remains, I think, something of an open question. Not a big, glaring, flashing red light or anything. They'll be fine, but you've got this hotshot quarterback and Drew Aller. You've got a great duo of running backs in Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. You got to be able to move the ball through the air, especially now that you've got both Mitchell Tinsley and Parker Washington going pro. Right. So who's going to step up out there? Is it Cephas? Is it, any number of other guys? We'll find that out. Carmelo Taylor is a 4-star from Virginia who's smaller, but just an absolute burner.
Okay.
Who is a guy you could see stepping in and maybe giving them more of a vertical threat.
How tall?
5'10".
Okay, so maybe like jet action, maybe used as a decoy at times, but somebody who can sort of stress defenses in specific ways. Okay.
Yeah, I believe a smaller type guy, but a definite burner, man.
Great.
I mean, he's got great speed, and especially if Drew Aller's got the big arm that so many folks are excited about, you could see them maybe utilizing Taylor in a way. Again, a 4-star, noted for his speed. Not enrolling until summer, though, which you could see hurting a true freshman. But if he's got the speed and if he continues to rise once he gets to Penn State the way he rose throughout this recruiting class, you could see maybe there's a role for him.
And James Franklin doesn't have a type with receivers. Like, he doesn't need a receiver to be 6'2". Doesn't need a receiver to be 6'4". I mean, both, Jahan Dotson and KJ Hamler were sub 6 feet and dominated Big Ten teams.
That's right. So he's an interesting name that I could see Penn State fans potentially getting to know in some key spots throughout the course of the season when they need a big play. Other names that stand out: Elliott Washington, 4-star defensive back, comes up from Florida. Could see him getting some time with the twos. Again, much like the defensive line, Penn State is in a position with its defensive backfield where they have guys that they can plug and play with that are currently on the roster. They're not in need of a freshman to step up and plug a gap. If they find that diamond in the rough who's good enough to step up and play with the ones, then obviously they're going to look at that. But for the time being, having some depth, especially at that cornerback spot, defensive back as a whole, Elliott Washington, the 4-star, is a guy I could see maybe shouldering his way in and getting some time with the twos. Another interesting name, just because Penn State is widely noted as linebacker U, Tony Rojas at linebacker, the 4-star from Virginia. He's in a much similar position as Elliott Washington, where it's not like Penn State needs Rojas to step up and fill a role as a starter at linebacker. They don't need that. They've got guys. They're plenty deep at linebacker, but if he is as good as advertised, you could see him getting some time with the twos, maybe finding his way onto the field in some packages.
All right, fair enough. By the way, there's a weird thing with, so do you remember who did James Franklin beef with early on? Was it Randy Edsall over recruiting in Maryland?
You talk about the dominate the state BS, yeah.
Penn State has 6 of the top 10 players from the state of Virginia. Is that where Trace McSorley's from?
It is.
I want to say, yeah. It's where Trace McSorley's from. 6 of their absolute best recruits are from Virginia. It's Pennsylvania and Virginia. Penn State runs the old Dominion state of Virginia. 6 of the top 10. That's crazy. I didn't realize it was that pronounced, has gotten to be that pronounced.
They've been very, very solid at recruiting the Mid-Atlantic region.
Yeah.
It's probably a stretch to say they've dominated the state of Pennsylvania. They've done a really good job in the state of Pennsylvania, as any big in-state power should. They've lost some guys to Ohio State. That's just the cost of doing business when the Buckeyes are next door, right?
It's also when there's just so many good players in Pennsylvania year in, year out. Yeah.
So, they've not gotten a perfect track record on that front, but to say the least, they've done really well in the Mid-Atlantic region, as evidenced here by what they did in Virginia, pulling, names over the course of the last, 5 years now from really that entire region to Penn State.
Well, you look at how down both Virginia and Virginia Tech have been now recently. James Franklin, all too happy to just go in and clear out.
The final note I'll add on Penn State is that I am going to have to try very, very hard to tamper.
I was going to say, you're going to steel yourself? Yeah.
Tamper's the wrong word. To temper my excitement when it comes to Penn State this coming season. I feel very hopeful.
Okay.
About 23.
Great. Love it.
Close things out for me. Let's talk about USC. USC in an advantageous spot, being so Caleb Williams is coming back. Their Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, formerly a transfer from Oklahoma, played with Lincoln Riley there, played with him here. In just year 2, he wins the Heisman Trophy. Coming into this season, again, SC has been very active trying to surround him with playmakers. But the question that we addressed on a previous episode was defense with SC.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to win a national championship. They're not going to contend with some of these SEC powers. They have a hard enough time contending with Utah because of that defense. So was that an area of focus here? Where are they at with respect to this 23 class?
I think they're hoping that transfers from Arizona are the difference on defense.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And I guess the state of Arizona. Yeah. Look, they got a good lineman from Arizona. They got a good corner from Arizona. This is the university of, not necessarily the state of, but Anthony Lucas comes in from Texas A&M as a transfer on the defensive line. Mason Cobb from Oklahoma State. I don't believe he's from the state of Arizona. But defense is largely going to be, at least in the short term, a portal opportunity for USC and a portal priority, not necessarily a recruiting trail priority. And I guess I don't know if you saw Bruce Feldman's piece for The Athletic about, players in the NFL playoffs, players in the Super Bowl, players overall, that being a highly rated defensive recruit is it projects a lot better long term for success than a highly rated offensive recruit, because there's so much that's more random with offensive success, scheme or usage or who's around you. You're just sort of, if you're a top flight receiver, you're dependent on quarterback, you're dependent on offensive line, but on defense, you're just winning one-on-ones. And so we'll see. But in terms of where USC is generally on a talent level on defense, they're nowhere near a championship level. Now, that said, this year's offensive class is, at the top, fully electric. It's ridiculous. It is a horror story for other teams that USC is playing because of Malachi Nelson being a top-flight quarterback coming into SC. And we didn't mention Malachi Nelson on the previous episode when we were talking about this quarterback class. His ceiling is ridiculous. He looked around a little bit, took a visit to Texas A&M because why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you take visits if you're a top-flight high school football player? Zachariah Branch is we talked about Penn State and the little guy at receiver there. I think Branch might be the number 1 receiver, or he's a top 2 or 3 receiver in this class, a 5-star receiver. An absolute terror. Absolute breakaway speed, but also a polished receiver. Not huge at about 5'9", 5'10", but somebody that you're just not going to be able to keep off the field. Got
a Tyreek Hill comp.
Yeah.
24/7. So obviously, thought very highly of.
He is a find a way kind of guy, whether it's reverses, whether it's screens, whether it's going deep and just burning some poor Pac-12 corner, find a way to get him on the field, find a way to get him the ball. He's that special. So that's a complete jewel to this class. Malachi Nelson should be very good, has been very good at, I think it's Los Al, the high school in Southern California for quite some time. Yeah. So USC is in great hands offensively moving forward. Even, Dorian Singer, arguably the best receiver for Arizona in the back half of the season. He comes in as a transfer. Jordan Addison making his way to the NFL. They lost a couple of, formerly high-profile receivers to the portal, and Kyle Ford and Brew McCoy. I guess that was last year. Gary Bryant being the other big one recently. They're in great shape offensively. It's a new look at running back. They bring in another blue chip running back. They have a couple of pieces that they brought in on defense, but this is not, and mentioned in the last episode, their biggest recruiting competition on the West Coast is Oregon. Oregon made defense and stacking their defensive roster with blue chip players a priority. And even if USC made it a priority, they swung and they missed on a lot of these guys. And so maybe the portal will be enough to get them to the next tier and moving forward towards becoming a perennial playoff type team. But as they move to the Big Ten, I don't know, man. It seems that there's very little that changes an opponent's desire to just run straight at USC right now with the way this roster is constructed.
Yeah, I'm curious about this. I mean, it's very stacked offensively.
They're going to be so good on offense this year.
And I don't blame any offensive talent for wanting to go out west. Or if you're out west, stay out there and play for Lincoln Riley, because clearly he knows how to develop quarterbacks. Clearly he knows how to develop skill talent around those quarterbacks. Mm-hmm. You'd be crazy not to want to go there. I understand that appeal. They're always going to have a good offense. It's just what Lincoln Riley does well. Defensively, though, it does not seem like it is that heavy on some of the areas that that we've called out time and again throughout the course of this season with USC. So maybe it is a scheme thing. I mean, when we talked through the half-team qualities of USC on a previous episode, like 2 weeks ago now, mm-hmm. one of your points was that they have to get better. They have to get better, not because they have to get better to be better, but because there's an inevitability to the fact that they can't be as bad as they were last season with the talent that they have, that another year they're going to get better at tackling. The scheme is going to set in. You would expect that things will go in a good direction.
I just don't know how many years Alex Grinch can field a subpar defense and you just keep employing Alex Grinch. I just, maybe it's players need to catch up to his scheme and it's very specific. But if that's the case, that's not a good defensive coordinator if players are constantly trying to catch up.
Yeah, and also if you're going to base your defense around a high volume of guys coming via the portal, that makes it really difficult for them to pick something up that quickly.
Sure.
Now, in some cases, these guys are talented enough that you would expect the learning curve will be pretty quick. But also, portal is hit or miss, man.
True.
Maybe you're better at it if you're a preeminent program and you essentially get your pick of the litter of guys who want to come there. You're not having to go out there and scout as much as guys are scouting you. But it does not feel like a super sustainable model to rely on the portal year in and year out. It may work fine this year, but this
it depends what your goals are.
Depends on what your goals are. I would like to have seen a heavier emphasis on defense in this class.
Yeah. They hit the offensive line section of things, both in the portal with Ethan White coming in from Florida and on the recruiting trail. They had two pretty big wins. I mean, they're not super highly ranked, but they were coveted by a number of big programs on the inside of their offensive line. It's just who's setting the edge for the next 3 years? Who is plugging holes at inside linebacker, right? Who is coming up at a sort of box safety position for the next 2 or 3 years? There aren't a lot of answers for USC. And Lincoln Riley recruited really good defensive players to Oklahoma. It didn't work out in terms of results, but he's not even doing that right now out of at least the high school ranks. We'll see if they can keep growing through the portal on defense, but those guys don't tend to enter as often. Those types of game changers just get recruited to huge places, play 3 years, and go to the NFL. And so it is like you are alluding to, it's just risky. It's just risky given USC's intentions and aspirations to say, well, I guess we'll find a game-changing 3 technique every year. Okay. Yeah. Hopefully that works out.
It's really hard to do that year in and year out. I mean, look at Michigan State. Right? Yeah. Michigan State's a good example. Maybe not exactly apples to apples here, but caught lightning in a bottle with Kenneth Walker. Following year couldn't capture that same magic and, fell short of some expectations. Before we move on, before we put a bow on this episode.
Okay.
While we're on the topic of USC, I wanted to ask about Malachi Nelson because Malachi Nelson, I feel like because of a lot of the Arch Manning hype, because we've talked about Nico at Tennessee and some of the other quarterbacks in this class, it almost feels like some have overlooked Malachi Nelson, which is crazy because I remember way back when we first started hearing his name, he got a comp to Justin Fields. And I checked before we hit record here today, and the latest comp, which was 2 years ago now, was Jordan Love. So those are some pretty good names. Yep. He's got a first-round grade on him in both cases here. What do we know about Malachi Nelson? He's, a year out now from Caleb Williams going pro and him presumably being the guy unless something changes. But what have you heard about Malachi Nelson as just as a player?
Unbelievable arm. A little bit skinny. He's listed at 6'3", 180. I don't know how recent that measurement was. Can maybe be a little bit careless with the ball. But this is, it's hard to project forward when he's going to have better receivers and a better offensive line in front of me, that he's a natural thrower, that he's very, very good. He was committed to Oklahoma when Lincoln Riley was there and decommitted when Riley came to USC. And it just made sense given that he was in Southern California. But he's also one of those guys who's played, I think, relatively top tier talent in Southern California. So
that was going to be my next question. He's a Southern California quarterback. What do we know about that level of competition?
Yeah, no, he's played against good schools. Los Alamitos is one of the bigger programs in Southern California. Obviously, there's a whole other tier with places like Bosco and Mater Dei, but Los Alamitos is very well respected and he's played in big games. I think he's going to thrive at SC, especially because it's another situation where he's not going to be counted on this year to be immediately the guy where he can sit behind Caleb Williams and Miller Moss. At the time of recording, Miller Moss is at USC, and develop into that system. Guys seem to immediately thrive with Lincoln Riley as they enter that system, and I don't expect him to be any different.
All right, there you have it. Notre Dame, Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, and incoming USC, soon to be Big Ten USC as of 2024. solidverbal@gmail.com, as always, is where you can go if you want to email us. Let us know anything we missed. Please go out to our YouTube channel.
Yes.
You can see clips. We post them out there. YouTube.com/thesolidverbal, or if you just prefer the @solidverbal, that'll also work. Make sure you follow and contribute to the ongoing conversations that take place all throughout our social media accounts on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. We even post out on TikTok now and again. So we are everywhere we could possibly be. We would also encourage you to go on out to verballers.com, VERBALLERS.com. That is our Patreon community where we offer bonus shows, extra perks, early access, a thriving Discord community even into the offseason now. It's a great place to be, a great place to hang if you are a college football. Really, if you're just a cool dude or gal.
Cool dude or gal.
Or gal. Yeah, we'd love to have you. We'd just love to have you. It's a civilized community of good people who just like hanging out on Discord and chatting about anything in any great number of channels. Our fine folks who help moderate the community do an awesome job keeping up with what's current and what needs to be broken off into its own little thing. It's a cool spot. It's a cool spot. Definitely an area you and I are going to hang out more during this off season. And last but certainly not least, man, subscribe to the show.
Yes.
Subscribe to the show. We do 2 episodes a week publicly. There is a bonus show that I alluded to that we do every Thursday out on Patreon, our Q&A/Brew&A episode. But 2 a week all throughout the off season. We'd love to have you as part of the Verballerhood.
Definitely. That's all I have.
For that guy over there, my good friend Dan, the man Rubenstein, for myself, Ty Hildenbrandt. We will talk to you all soon, a little bit later this week. In the meantime, stay solid.
Peace.